commitment to living this more Gnostic or mystical kind of life? Is there, you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. No. Sufis have been at the heart of traditional Islam during most of its history and have had an honored place within Islam. Although in recent times, for various reasons, Sufism has been more marginalized in Islamic cultures because of two factors. One is because of modernism with its emphasis on science and materialism, which affected even Islamic thinking, and also extremism and fundamentalism, which is in some ways a new phenomena, a relatively new phenomena in Islam. And this has caused the marginalization of Sufism in the most modern times. But traditionally, Islam has been a civilization in which mysticism has been very close to the surface, you might say. And it's partly because there are many features of many aspects of Islam that are explicitly mystical. For instance, people talk about, imagine that the Quran could be read in a literalistic way, the way some people read the Bible. Well, if you're going to take the Quran literally, how are you going to deal with a verse like this? To God belongs the east and the west, and wheresoever you look is the face of God. How could you understand that literally? You have to be a raving mystic to accept that proposition. Or another example, Muslims pray 5 times a day. They do a series of standing, bowing, and prostrating. What are they prostrating to? A religious institution? A human being? No. They're standing before the infinite, and they're putting all of their worldly concerns and preoccupations behind them, and they're saying the divinity is greater than everything. And they hopefully are remembering the advice of the Prophet Muhammad, who said, the ritual prayer is only valid with presence.
True, if you're going through it by rote, it has no meaning.
Yes. So the ritual prayer itself, even at the level of exoteric Islam, becomes an exercise in mindfulness. So in many ways, Sufism is not exactly the same as the outer religion of Islam, but it has been a path, what we call a tariqah, and it's explicitly recognized as a path for those who seek more than nominal belonging to a religion, for those kinds of souls who have a contemplative and transformational calling. And Sufi orders, particularly since the 12th century, have been pervasive in the Islamic world. They're just a part of life. And
this is really non-exclusive in nature and global.
It's global, it's non-exclusive, and it's an accepted part of common consciousness that some people will be called to this transformational, contemplative way of life, while still having families, holding down a job, doing the practical things of life. So this has been a beautiful side, a very enriching side of Islamic civilization. Recently, the King of Morocco called 1,000 Sufi sheikhs to Marrakesh. This was a few months ago, and I was there. And he wanted to send a message to the world that Sufis should be allowed to do their work, that they work for the betterment of human souls, and which ultimately benefits cultures, and they should not be instrumentalized politically to serve any political purpose, but should be protected and allowed to do the work that traditionally they do. So I had the great pleasure of being together with about 1,000 Sufi sheikhs and scholars. A third of them were from Black Africa, a third of them were from the Arab world, and a third of them were from everywhere else, including California and France and even China. So it was a great affirmation that Sufis have a place and that their work is needed in today's world and can contribute to the stability of societies at a time when there are a lot of destabilizing factors, particularly extremism.
Of all kinds.
Yeah, and one of my friends, Sidi Ahmed Kostas, who is the Assistant Minister for Religious Affairs in Morocco, now has been given a TV program in Morocco where he talks about, I'd say, Sufi character and extremists who have never, for some reason, they're mostly ignorant people, are being exposed to the beauties of the teachings on character and the sweetness of the Sufi heart. And it's a very beneficial thing for that society at this time.
And it seems that it's important for us to understand something here, and you already touched on this when you were talking about the prayer 5 times a day. This doesn't have to do with minimalizing oneself as a human being before a deity. This really is about remembering that aspect within the self. And
absolutely.
There is a line by Rumi that I just love, and it had to do with knock and the door will be open unto you. And he was saying, I knocked and the door was open, and then I realized I was knocking from the inside.
Yes, yes.
Meaning we already are that, but we have forgotten that we already are that. This is an awakening and remembering as much as anything, is it not?
Yes, yes. That's a good point. So if we look at the prayer and you see that people are standing in rows and they're bowing and they're prostrating. When they stand, this is a meditative posture of accepting our human responsibility as caretakers and as representatives of the divine in this world. The bowing reminds us that we're also servants of creation and each other. The prostration is a prostration not to any human authority or human formulation. The prostration is toward the real, towards the highest truth itself, and acknowledging that while we assume responsibility and authority in the world, we ultimately are surrendered to the beauty, the grace, and the power of the divine, without which we would be nothing. All of our faculties are gifts of the divine. And
we'd have no knowing of beauty.
Right, right. So we are in awe of the beauty of the divine more than anything else. And Sufism is a process, it's understood as a process of purifying the heart so that we perceive, we reach a level of spiritual perception relatively free of the distortions of egoism. But the teachings on ego in Sufism, I think, are very practical because we don't talk about destroying the self, and we don't talk about being without a self. But we do talk about 7 levels of the self. And at the lowest level, the self is in a prison of compulsions and
addictions and whatnot,
etc.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we move through various levels of subtilization. The second level is a stage of feeling some conscience, awakening of conscience. The third stage is reaching becoming a functioning, healthy ego, a positive human being, what would be considered salvation in religious terms. The fourth level of the self in Sufism is the beginning of awakening into consciousness, mindfulness, presence. This is where most of the esoteric teachings begin. And it can be a long phase of our practice to introduce presence and awareness into every breath, every action, every relationship. The fifth level is experiencing unity or intimacy with the divine, where we have a lived experience of how everything we are is sourced in the divine. It's only the fifth stage. The sixth stage, and I'm going through this as concisely as I can, the point being that we always have some experience of I-ness at all these stages. The sixth stage is when you turn back from that unity and return to this world with all of its conflicts, joys and disappointments, but with that illumination, with that awareness that the divine is closer to us than our jugular vein. So the sixth stage is almost like crucifixion. It's when you experience all the suffering of life, but without losing your awareness of being sourced in the divine. The seventh stage is being an ordinary human being, invisible, anonymous, but with purity of heart, grounded in this life, but integrating all levels of consciousness in that life. So, but always the sense of I is transformed. In the early stages, you're like ice. You're like a block of ice. At another stage, you melt into water. The I melts into water. At another stage, it becomes steamy, vaporous. And finally, at the highest stage, it's almost as if one's sense of I, while being locatable as a person, also has at least an aspect which is more like humidity. You sense that your identity extends in some sense through the universe and is in every other me, in every other self. But still, there's always a sense, an ever subtler, more comprehensive sense of self, so that the self is like the drop. It doesn't dissolve in the ocean. The drop realizes it contains the ocean. And the drop can choose. The drop that has reached a certain level of spiritual maturity can be at will the drop or the ocean, depending on what the need is at that moment.
And that's why you're at the Science and Non-Duality Conference.
Yes. Yes.
As I was listening to you go through the seven phases, it seems to me that Rumi appeared to be writing a lot of his most well-known works from almost that fifth stage.
Well, the ghazals that we've heard, the ecstatic utterances, many of them were at that stage. But he also has his masterwork is called the Mesnavi, and it's 6 volumes of rhymed couplets that include stories that are interwoven almost like soap operas. They go on sometimes for 50 pages with lots of interruptions, and there are sublime prayers, there are vulgar jokes, but all of it is a teaching about this oneness. And every story, every page reminds us of this oneness. And so he has a sober teaching and a systematic teaching and a great spiritual psychology that's very practical as well.
It seems the West has more or less glommed onto the ecstatic parts that we can interpret in the way we wish. I think that's probably why it's become so embraced, but you know, that's a wonderful starting place.
It's a beginning.
It's a wonderful, wonderful
and
beginning.
And that ecstasy and that bliss, we have a right to that too.
Yes, we do.
We need it. More than that, we need it.
We do need that. Okay, I have a couple of practical questions. The title of sheikh, how is this conferred upon a person?